My name is Juniper Hale and I am 33 years old. 4 weeks ago, my mother stood in the doorway of the pediatric speech therapy clinic I built from nothing, looked at the hand-painted letters on the glass that read Hale and Associates Communication Center, and told the licensing board investigator standing beside her that I had falsified my clinical credentials. She had a folder. She had typed statements. She had, apparently, been preparing this for 8 months. What she did not know was that I had been expecting something like this for almost 3 years. Not the exact shape of it. Not the folder, not the investigator, not the Tuesday morning timing. But the essential fact of it. That my mother would one day try to take the thing I had built the way she had always tried to take the things I built. That part did not surprise me at all. In the left-hand drawer of my desk, behind the hanging files and the extra staple refills, I kept a gray linen accordion folder with 8 tabbed sections. Section 1 held my original licensure documents, stamped and certified by the Tennessee Department of Health. Section 2 held my graduate transcripts from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, sealed and notarized. Sections 3 through 8 held something else entirely. Something I had been assembling quietly, carefully, the way my grandmother taught me to piece a quilt, one square at a time, making sure every seam was straight before you moved to the next one. Before I tell you what was in those other sections, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And drop your city and the time it is where you are right now in the comments. I read every single one of those, and there is something about knowing where you're sitting when you hear a story like this that matters to me. Now let me take you back to Millbrook, Tennessee, about 26 years ago, to a kitchen that smelled like biscuits and pine sol and the particular silence that settles over a house when one child is being celebrated and another is being managed. I grew up the second daughter in a family of 4 in Millbrook, a town small enough that everyone knew your business but polite enough to pretend they didn't. My father, Dale Hale, ran a small HVAC repair company out of a van he kept immaculately clean. He was a quiet man, methodical, the kind of person who read the instruction manual before assembling anything and then filed the manual in a labeled folder in the kitchen drawer. I inherited that from him. My mother, Patrice, was the opposite. She moved through the world on instinct and charm and a deep, unshakable belief that appearances were the same thing as reality. My older sister, Camille, was the appearance my mother had chosen to maintain. Camille was 3 years older than me and beautiful in the way that made adults stop mid-sentence. She had our mother's cheekbones and a laugh that carried across a room. She was not unkind, exactly. She was simply the center of gravity in our house, and everything else, including me, orbited around her without anyone deciding it should be that way. It just was. I was the child who ate the leftover biscuits. Camille got the ones fresh from the oven. I do not say this as a metaphor. I mean it literally. Patrice would pull the baking sheet out of the oven on Saturday mornings, set 4 biscuits on a plate for Camille, and tell me the ones in the pan were still cooling. By the time they were cool, Camille had eaten 2 of hers and my mother was already washing the plate. The school things were the same. Camille's spelling bee trophies lived on the mantel. My academic bowl certificates were in a shoebox in the hall closet because, Patrice explained, the mantel was already full. When Camille needed new dance shoes, they appeared within the week. When I needed a new clarinet reed for band, I waited 3 months and eventually bought one myself with babysitting money. I was 11. None of this made me angry as a child. Children absorb these things as weather. Not injustice, just climate. It was only later, much later, that I understood I had spent my entire childhood being told, in every small and wordless way, that I was the child Patrice tolerated rather than the one she chose. My grandmother, my father's mother, whose name was Edith Hale and who everyone called Miss Edie, saw it differently. Miss Edie lived 12 minutes from our house in a white clapboard bungalow with a covered porch and a garden that she tended with the same precision my father gave to his instruction manuals. She grew tomatoes, 4 varieties, and kept a hand-lettered chart on the pantry door tracking which plants produced and which didn't. She was 71 when I was 7. And she had the kind of eyes that made you feel she had already understood the thing you were about to say. She used to sit with me on that porch on Sunday afternoons while my father visited inside and Camille stayed home with Patrice. I don't know if it was planned that way. I only know that those Sunday afternoons were mine, and I held them carefully. Miss Edie never said anything directly critical about Patrice. She was too careful for that, and too wise. But she said other things. She said them slowly, like she was setting them down somewhere permanent. She told me once, I was 9 years old and I had just lost the county science fair to a boy whose project my teacher had clearly helped him build. She told me, Juniper, the people who are watching aren't always the ones making the noise. I didn't fully understand it then. I wrote it in the back of my notebook anyway. She told me another time, when I was 12 and Patrice had given Camille the bedroom with the window seat and moved me to the smaller room at the back of the house, a person can only take what you let them hold. Keep the important things in your own hands. I thought she was being poetic. She wasn't. Miss Edie was a retired school speech therapist. She had worked for the Millbrook County school system for 31 years, retiring in 1989. She was the one who first noticed, when I was about 6, that I had a particular patience with language, that I would sit with younger children at church and help them sound out words without rushing them, without showing frustration. She was the one who told my father, quietly, over coffee one Sunday, that I had a gift for it. My father nodded. He did not tell Patrice, because Miss Edie asked him not to. She said she wanted to see what Juniper did with it before anyone decided what it meant. What I did with it, eventually, was build a career. But first, there was the wound. I was 22 years old, a week away from finishing my undergraduate degree in communication sciences at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, when Patrice called me on a Thursday evening in April. I was in my apartment, a one-room studio above a dry cleaner on Fraser Street that smelled permanently of chemical solvent and which I had made habitable with a second-hand rug and a lamp I found at a yard sale for $3. I was eating cereal for dinner because it was the end of the month and I had $14 in my checking account. I had worked 22 hours that week at the campus library on top of my full course load. I had applied to graduate programs in speech-language pathology. I had been accepted at 2 of them. I had not told my mother yet because I was still figuring out the funding. Patrice called and I answered on the second ring. She did not ask about my finals. She did not ask about graduation, which was 8 days away. She said, "I need you to know that your father and I have decided to give Camille the money from Grandma Edie's account." I set down my spoon. Miss Edie had passed away 14 months earlier, in February of my junior year. She had left a small savings account. I later learned it held $22,000 that my father had been managing as part of her estate. Miss Edie had told me once, I was 19 and she was 83 and we were sitting on her porch for what I did not know would be one of the last long afternoons. She had told me, "I've set something aside for you. For when you're ready to start." I had nodded. I had not asked questions. I trusted her the way you trust the ground under your feet. Patrice continued on the phone. Camille had an opportunity, she said. A boutique she wanted to open in Chattanooga. A retail space. She needed startup capital. The money from Miss Edie's account would be the seed. It was the practical choice, Patrice said. Camille had a real plan. And Patrice said, I remember the exact phrasing because I have replayed it several hundred times. Your grandmother would have wanted it used for something real, Juniper. You're going to graduate school. You'll take out loans like everyone else. I did not cry. I sat very still in my apartment above the dry cleaner and I listened to my mother explain why the thing my grandmother had set aside for me was being redirected to my sister. And I said, I understand. Not because I agreed. Because I needed to get off the phone before I said something I couldn't take back. I did not go to my own graduation ceremony. I told my father I had a scheduling conflict with a library shift I couldn't swap. He believed me, or he pretended to. Patrice sent a card with a $20 bill and a note that said "Proud of you," in her looping handwriting. Camille texted a single emoji. A balloon. I sat in my apartment that Saturday in May and ate a sandwich and read the acceptance letter from UT Chattanooga's graduate program in speech-language pathology for the 4th time. I had been awarded a partial assistantship, $9,000 toward the 2-year program. The rest I would borrow. I had already done the math. I would graduate with $41,000 in student debt. I would then complete a clinical fellowship year at a salary that would not cover that debt comfortably. It would take years. I was not angry at the math. I was angry at the reason for the math. There is a difference. That night I called my father. He answered in his careful way, and I could hear the television in the background, the evening news, the sound of a house where everything was ordinary. I asked him if he had known about Miss Edie's account being given to Camille. A long pause. Then, your mother thought it was the right call, June. What did you think? Another pause. I thought your grandmother had a different idea. But you let it happen. He didn't answer that. We stayed on the phone for another 2 minutes talking about nothing. When I hung up, I sat with the silence for a while. My father was not a cruel man. He was a man who had learned, somewhere early in his marriage, that the cost of disagreeing with Patrice was higher than the cost of going along. I understood that. I did not forgive it easily, but I understood it. The boutique Camille opened lasted 14 months. I didn't follow that story closely. I was busy. The 2 years of graduate school were the hardest I have ever worked. I held the assistantship, which meant I ran a lab section for undergrad students 3 mornings a week in addition to my own coursework and clinical placements. I took a second job on weekends doing transcription work for a medical records company. $12 an hour. Headphones on, converting physician dictation into typed notes. I bought groceries on Tuesdays when the store marked down the produce. I had one good blazer that I wore to every clinical placement and every job interview and every professional event. I dry cleaned it twice a year and hung it on the back of the bathroom door when I showered so the steam would freshen it between cleanings. I did not go home for Thanksgiving my second year. I told my parents I had a clinical deadline. I did not have a clinical deadline. I had decided, quietly, that I needed to spend that year building something that was entirely mine before I let my family's gravity pull me back into orbit. What I was building was competence. Documented, verified, receipted competence. My clinical supervisor in graduate school was a woman named Dr. Frances Alcott, who ran the university's Pediatric Communication Disorders Clinic and who had, in 30 years of practice, developed the particular quality of attention that very good clinicians have. She could sit with a 4-year-old who hadn't spoken a full sentence in his life and make him feel, within 20 minutes, that the room was safe. I watched her do it dozens of times. I studied the mechanics of it the way my father studied HVAC schematics. I took notes. I asked questions after sessions. I stayed late. Dr. Alcott told me, at the end of my second year, that I had the best clinical instincts she had supervised in a decade. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said everything, without performance. I wrote it in the small notebook I kept in my bag. Not because I needed the validation, but because I knew there would come a time when I would need documentation of who had seen me and what they had said. Miss Edie had died before I finished my degree. But she had not left me only the memory of Sunday afternoons on her porch. 6 months after I graduated, I received a letter from an attorney named Thomas Greer in Millbrook. The envelope was white, business-sized, with the law firm's name in the upper left corner, and it had been forwarded to my apartment in Chattanooga through my father's address. My father, I later understood, had known it was coming. He had not warned me. I think he didn't know how. The letter informed me that Edith Marie Hale had established a small irrevocable educational trust in my name in 2009, when I was 18 years old. The trust held $22,000, the same amount Patrice had told me was in Miss Edie's savings account. The same money Patrice had redirected to Camille. Except that it wasn't the same money. Miss Edie had opened 2 accounts. One was the savings account that appeared in her estate, the one Patrice had found and redistributed. That account had held $4,000. The other account, the one held in the trust, had been funded over 11 years through small, regular deposits that Miss Edie made from her pension and her Social Security, starting the year I turned 7. $22,000, accumulated over 11 years, one careful deposit at a time, held in a trust that named me as sole beneficiary and that specified the funds could only be used for education or professional licensure costs. The trust had matured when I turned 25. I was 24 when I received the letter. Thomas Greer informed me that the funds would be available to me in 11 months, upon my 25th birthday, at which point I could direct them toward any qualifying educational or professional purpose. I sat with that letter for a long time. Miss Edie had started this when I was 7 years old. She had watched my mother distribute love unevenly for over a decade, and she had said nothing directly, and she had done something instead. She had been making deposits every month for 11 years so that when the time came, when Patrice inevitably found a reason to redirect whatever visible inheritance existed, there would be something else. Something invisible. Something mine. I thought about the Sunday afternoons on the porch. I thought about the hand-lettered chart on the pantry door. I thought about the way she set things down slowly, like she was placing them somewhere permanent. I put the letter in a gray linen accordion folder I bought at an office supply store for $6. I labeled the first tab. I started filling in the other tabs. On my 25th birthday, I directed the $22,000 from Miss Edie's trust toward the down payment on a commercial lease for a small office suite on Birchwood Avenue in Chattanooga. The suite had 3 treatment rooms, a waiting area with a window, and a kitchenette. The carpet was the color of old mustard and the fluorescent light in the second treatment room buzzed at a frequency I eventually learned to ignore. I named the practice Hale and Associates Communication Center. I was the only associate for the first 2 years. I put the hand-painted letters on the glass door myself, standing on a step stool on a Saturday morning in March, using a stencil kit I had bought at a craft store. The letters were not perfectly even. I decided I didn't care. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think some of you watching this know exactly what it feels like to build something from the ground up while the people who were supposed to support you were busy supporting someone else. If you have ever taken out a loan your family didn't co-sign, worked a second job your family didn't know about, or built a career in a field your family didn't take seriously until it was too successful to ignore, type the word "built" in the comments. I want to see how many of us there are. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that now. These stories take time to tell right, and your subscription is what makes it possible to keep telling them. Now, back to the story. The practice grew slowly at first, then steadily. By the time I was 28, I had 2 associate clinicians on staff and a waitlist of 6 weeks for pediatric evaluations. By the time I was 30, I had 4 staff members, a second suite down the hall, and a contract with 2 local elementary schools to provide on-site speech services 2 days a week. The Tennessee Department of Health had audited my licensure documentation twice, standard procedure for growing practices, and both times my files were complete, organized, and immediately available. I had a binder for every category of documentation. I had learned that from my father, who kept his HVAC certifications in a labeled folder in the kitchen drawer, and from Miss Edie, who kept her tomato chart on the pantry door. My mother's relationship with my success followed a predictable arc. First there was the silence. The years when I was building and she was not watching. Then there was the cautious interest, the occasional call asking how things were going. The way she started mentioning the clinic to her friends in Millbrook in a way that made it sound like something she had encouraged. Then there was Camille. Camille's boutique had closed. A second venture, a catering company she started with a friend, had lasted 8 months. She was 36 years old, living in a rental house in Millbrook, working part-time at a real estate office, and telling anyone who asked that she was in a transitional period. Patrice had been supplementing Camille's rent for 2 years. I knew this because my father told me, one of the rare times he called me on his own, on a Sunday evening when Patrice was at a church committee meeting. "Your mother's stretched thin," he said. "She won't say it, but she is." "I know," I said. "She's proud of what you've built, June. She just doesn't know how to say it the right way." I did not respond to that. I had learned, by 33, that the statement "she's proud, she just can't say it" was a sentence that asked me to do the emotional labor of accepting credit that was never offered. I loved my father. I would not do that labor anymore. What happened next happened on a Tuesday morning in September, 4 weeks before I am sitting here telling you this. I arrived at the clinic at 8 o'clock, as I do every Tuesday. My first appointment was at 8:30, a 5-year-old boy named, I'll call him Marcus, who had been coming to see me for 7 months and who had, in those 7 months, gone from producing fewer than 20 functional words to producing sentences of 4 and 5 words with increasing reliability. The progress notes from his case were some of the most detailed I had ever kept. His mother cried at his 6-month review. I did not cry in the room, but I cried a little in the kitchenette afterward, which I consider acceptable. I was reviewing Marcus's session plan when my office manager, a woman named Greta who had been with me for 4 years and who had the organizational instincts of an air traffic controller, knocked on my door and opened it with the expression she uses when something is wrong. "There's a man from the licensing board in the waiting room," she said. "And your mother is with him." I set down my pen. I looked at Greta for exactly 3 seconds. "Ask him to give me 5 minutes," I said. "Offer him coffee." I opened the left-hand drawer of my desk. I took out the gray linen accordion folder. I checked each tab in order, the way you check a list before a flight. Licensure documents. Graduate transcripts. Clinical fellowship verification. Letters of professional reference. Correspondence file. Chronological record. 2 additional sections I had assembled over the past 3 years and which I had hoped I would never need to use. All 8 tabs were present. All 8 were current. I closed the drawer. I straightened my blazer. The same one, a newer version now, charcoal wool, purchased 3 years ago from a consignment shop for $40. I walked out to the waiting room. The licensing board investigator's name was Gerald Foss. He was in his late 50s, gray-haired, carrying a briefcase, with the careful neutral expression of someone who had delivered uncomfortable news many times and had learned to keep his face out of it. My mother stood beside him in a cream blouse and dark slacks, holding a manila folder against her chest. She looked composed. She looked, I realized, like she had rehearsed this. "Juniper," she said. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." I looked at her for a moment. Then I turned to Gerald Foss and extended my hand. "Mr. Foss. I'm Juniper Hale. Why don't we step into my office?" The three of us sat down. Greta closed the door behind us. Gerald Foss explained, in his careful neutral voice, that the board had received a written complaint alleging that I had misrepresented my clinical supervision hours during my fellowship year and that one of my letters of professional reference had been submitted under a name of a supervisor who had not, in fact, supervised my work. The complaint had been filed anonymously 8 months ago. The board had conducted a preliminary review and determined it warranted a formal inquiry. He was here to conduct an initial interview and to request access to my original documentation. He set the complaint on my desk. I looked at it without touching it. Then I looked at my mother. She had the expression she used when she believed she was being reasonable, a kind of careful softness, like someone handling something fragile. "I didn't want to do this, Juniper. But there were things I heard that concerned me. Things Camille mentioned. About the supervision records. I had to report what I knew." "What did Camille mention, specifically?" "That she had spoken to someone at the university. Someone who said your fellowship documentation had gaps." "Who at the university?" Patrice shifted slightly. "I don't remember the name." I did not respond to that. I turned back to Gerald Foss and placed the gray linen accordion folder on the desk between us. "Mr. Foss, I anticipated that my documentation might come under review at some point. Not because there are gaps in it, but because I have been aware for approximately 3 years that someone in my family had been making inquiries about my licensure history." I opened the folder to the first tab. "This is my original licensure certificate, issued by the Tennessee Department of Health on March 14, 2016, with the board's stamp and my license number. This is the renewal confirmation from 2019 and from 2022. I turned to the second tab. "These are my graduate transcripts from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, sealed and notarized, showing the completion of all required coursework and clinical practicum hours." Third tab. "This is the verification letter from Dr. Francis Alcott, my primary clinical supervisor during my fellowship year, signed, dated, and notarized, confirming 242 supervised clinical hours completed between August 2016 and June 2017. Dr. Alcott's current contact information is included. She is available to speak with the board directly." Fourth tab. "These are my secondary supervisor's verification letters, 2 of them, covering the remaining hours." I paused. Gerald Foss was writing. My mother was very still. I opened the fifth tab. "This is a correspondence file. It contains 17 emails received over the past 3 years from an address I traced to a public library computer in Millbrook, Tennessee, sent to the Tennessee Department of Health's complaint portal, the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga's Alumni Verification Office, and the American Speech-Language Hearing Association's Ethics Board. Each email made variations of the same allegation, that my clinical credentials were falsified. Each email was submitted anonymously. Each was investigated and closed without action because the documentation I provided in response was complete. I set the printed emails on the desk in a neat stack. I retained copies of every inquiry and every response. My mother's hands had tightened on the manila folder in her lap. I opened the 6th tab. This is a chronological record I began keeping in January of 2021, when I first became aware that someone was attempting to initiate complaints against my license. Each entry is dated and describes the nature of the inquiry, the source where I was able to identify it, and the action I took in response. 29 entries. I turned to my mother. The Millbrook, Tennessee Public Library is 4 blocks from your house, Mom. She said, Juniper, I was trying to protect the profession. I counted 4 seconds before I responded. My voice did not waver. You were trying to close what I built. She opened her mouth. I turned back to Gerald Foss before she could speak. Mr. Foss, I want to be direct with you. I have no interest in making this process difficult for the board. Every document you need is in this folder. I will provide digital copies within 24 hours. I will make Dr. Alcott available for a phone interview at the board's convenience. And I would like to formally request that the board review the pattern of complaints in my file, the 17 submissions over 3 years from what appears to be a single source, and make whatever determination it considers appropriate about the origin and intent of those complaints. Gerald Foss looked at the folder. He looked at the stack of emails. He looked at my mother, briefly, with the neutral expression of someone recalibrating. He said, Ms. Hale, I think we can resolve this today. I want to stop here for just a moment, because I know some of you watching this have had the experience of building something, a career, a business, a reputation, and having someone in your own family try to dismantle it. Not because they had evidence of wrongdoing. Because they couldn't tolerate that you had built it without them. If that resonates with you, type the word documented in the comments. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. I'll be right here when you get back. Now, back to what happened in that room. My mother sat in the chair across from my desk for the remainder of Gerald Foss's visit without speaking. Gerald reviewed the documentation methodically, asked 4 clarifying questions, all of which I answered with a specific reference to a tab and a page number, and at the end of 45 minutes, he closed his briefcase and told me he would submit his findings to the board within 10 business days and that he anticipated the complaint would be closed without action. He stood. He shook my hand. He nodded at my mother with the careful neutrality of a man who had understood the situation and had decided it was not his place to comment on it. After he left, Patrice and I sat in my office alone for the first time in I don't know how many years. She still had the manila folder. I could see the top sheet through the open edge. It was a printout of something, a web page, some article or database entry. I did not ask to see it. Whatever it contained, it had not been enough. How long have you been keeping that file? She asked. 3 years. She looked at the accordion folder on my desk. You were waiting for me. I was prepared for you, I said. That's different. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing I had been waiting, in some part of me, to hear for my entire adult life. Not the apology I had once hoped for. Something more honest than that. She said, I didn't think you'd actually do it. Any of it. The degree, the clinic, all of it. I didn't think you had it in you. I looked at her. I thought about the biscuits cooling on the pan. I thought about the shoebox in the hall closet. I thought about the $20 bill in the graduation card. I thought about a woman named Edith Hale sitting on a covered porch on Sunday afternoons, setting words down in places where they would hold. I know you didn't, I said. She left 20 minutes later. She did not take the manila folder. She left it on the chair. I picked it up after she was gone and looked at the top sheet. It was a printout from a website that sold credential verification services, the kind that helps employers check educational backgrounds. Someone had circled my name in blue ink and written a question mark next to my fellowship dates. I put it in the 7th tab of the accordion folder. For documentation. The board closed the complaint 14 days later, on a Thursday morning. Gerald Foss sent a formal letter on board letterhead, which I received by email and printed and placed in the first tab of the accordion folder behind my original licensure documents. The letter stated that the complaint had been reviewed and found to be without merit, that my documentation was complete and verified, and that the matter was closed. I read it twice. Then I set it down and went to see Marcus, who that morning produced his first complete 6-word sentence, unprompted, standing in the middle of the treatment room, pointing at a picture of a dog running in the grass. His mother was watching through the observation window. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. I did not cry in the room. I cried a little in the kitchenette afterward. The consequences for my mother and Camille unfolded the way consequences usually do in situations like this. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, the way water finds the low places. Gerald Foss's report, I later learned from Thomas Greer, who had remained my attorney and who I had called the morning of the visit, noted the pattern of repeated anonymous complaints from what appeared to be a single geographic source. The board does not pursue the originators of bad faith complaints as a standard practice, Thomas told me. But the record exists. If a licensed professional in Tennessee ever filed a complaint against another licensed professional, and Camille, it turned out, had briefly held a food handler's certification through her catering company, that record would be part of any review. Camille's certification had already lapsed. That particular consequence was theoretical. The more immediate consequence was social, and it moved through Millbrook the way things move through small towns. Not through announcements but through the particular silence that falls when people who were talking about something decide to stop talking about it in front of you. Patrice's church committee, several of whose members had children or grandchildren who were clients of mine, became aware, through the specific mechanism of small-town information flow, that Patrice had filed a complaint against my license. I did not tell them. I did not need to. Gerald Foss had driven a licensing board vehicle to my clinic on a Tuesday morning and parked it in the lot that faced Birchwood Avenue. Several people had seen it. Several people had asked Greta what it was about. Greta, who is loyal and precise, had told them it was a routine documentation review that had been resolved the same morning. The gap between routine review and complaint filed by the clinician's own mother is a gap that people in small towns fill in themselves. My father called me 3 weeks after the visit. It was a Sunday evening. Patrice was at church. I heard what happened, he said. I know. I should have. He stopped. Started again. When your grandmother set up that trust, she told me. She said, Dale, don't let Patrice take Juniper's ground from under her. I should have done more with that. I let that sit for a moment. My father was 71 years old. He had spent 40 years learning to absorb the cost of his wife's certainty. I was not going to hand him absolution, but I was not going to hand him condemnation either. He was a man who had loved me in the limited way he had available, and Miss Edie had loved me in the way that covered the difference. Between the two of them, I had been all right. She said that? I asked. She used those words? She said, don't let Patrice take Juniper's ground from under her. A pause. I kept the trust document. I never told your mother it existed. That was the one thing I did right. I sat with that for a while after we hung up. The one thing he did right. It was not nothing. Miss Edie had known that it would not be nothing. She had trusted him with the one task she needed him to hold, and he had held it. Patrice has not called me since the morning she left my office. I have not called her. I do not know if that silence is permanent or if it is one of the pauses that precede something else. I have stopped trying to predict what she will do, because prediction requires a model of the other person's motivations, and I have spent enough years trying to build a model of my mother's motivations to know that it is not a productive use of my time. What I know is this. The clinic is mine. The documentation is complete. Marcus produced an 8-word sentence last week, and his mother and I stood in the hallway after his session and talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The way you talk when you are both just relieved and glad. Greta reorganized the filing system in November and found a post-it note I had left inside the accordion folder 3 years ago, when I first started building the record. It said, in my own handwriting, keep the important things in your own hands. She brought it to me and asked if I wanted to throw it away. I put it in the 8th tab. Miss Edie died in February, 2 years before I opened the clinic, in the white clapboard bungalow with the covered porch and the garden she had tended with such precision. She was 89 years old. My father found her in the morning, in her chair on the porch, with a cup of tea on the table beside her that had gone cold in the night. The tomato chart was still on the pantry door. The porch chair still had the cushion she had recovered in blue-checked fabric the summer I was 12. I drove to Millbrook the morning my father called. I sat in her chair on the porch for a long time. The garden was February bare, The beds turned and mulched, waiting for spring. She had already planned what she would plant. The chart was in her handwriting on the pantry door. She had been planning forward, even at the end. I think about her when I sit in my office on the quiet mornings before the first appointments arrive. I think about the deposits she made every month for 11 years, small enough that no one noticed, consistent enough that they added up to something real. I think about the way she set words down in places where they would hold. The people who are watching aren't always the ones making the noise. If you are watching this and you recognize the feeling of building something while the people around you looked the other way, if you know what it is to keep a careful record because you learned early that no one else would keep it for you, then I think you understand why I kept that folder. Not out of bitterness. Not to punish anyone. Because Miss Edie taught me that the most important things are the ones you hold in your own hands, and I had decided, a long time ago, to hold mine. The clinic is full this week. 3 new evaluations on Thursday. Marcus has a follow-up on Friday morning, and his mother is bringing his little sister, who she thinks might benefit from an assessment. The mustard-colored carpet in the waiting room was replaced last spring with something warmer, a soft gray that makes the room feel steadier. The hand-painted letters on the glass door are still not perfectly even. I still don't care. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for sitting with me through it. If you recognize yourself anywhere in it, if you were ever the child whose certificates lived in a shoebox, the daughter who was told to take out loans like everyone else, the person who built something carefully and then had to defend it from someone who should have been proud of it, I want you to know that the documentation you keep is not paranoia. It is preparation. There is a difference. And the ground you have built under yourself is yours. Keep it in your own hands. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.